If I told you that the man who was once praised as one of the most trusted pawnbrokers in the United States, the man who has appeared on screen for over a decade, is now involved in one of the most shocking mysteries in modern American history, what would you think? And if I revealed that the famous pawn shop, where millions of viewers love to visit, celebrated as a cultural icon, is actually hiding a dark secret no one ever expected, how would you feel? From shady deals to horrific crimes, let's uncover the chilling story behind the glory of Pawn Stars. Don't forget to leave a comment with a 1 if you sympathize with Rick Harrison, or a 0 if you have a different opinion. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, where we will reveal all the secrets behind this story. It all began like a normal morning outside the gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, where a line of fans patiently waited with phones in hand, hoping to catch a glimpse of Rick Harrison, the show's humorous face and icon. With bright lights, old coins, war memorabilia, and mysterious items that have led to countless thrilling stories, the shop has been a staple of the show. But this time, it seems the behind-the-scenes story is even more intriguing than what was ever shown on TV. But this morning was different. No lights, no eager crowds. The shop was locked up, a yellow police tape across the familiar storefront. Federal agents and local police stood guard in silence. The cameras no longer focused on the Civil War rifles and Elvis records. They focused on something far more serious, a case that is shaking America to its core with a familiar face beloved by millions at the center, Rick Harrison. The news stunned the public when he was implicated in a major criminal investigation, so complex that the federal government had to step in. And things got even more shocking when Rick's closest confidant stepped forward. No one expected that inside the Nevada courtroom that day. What would rock the nation was not the charges or the verdict, but a confession. Amid the silence, a familiar voice rang out. It was Corey Harrison, Rick's son, and his longtime on-screen companion. Shaking in the courtroom, Corey spoke, a confession that would change everything forever. I was involved in that. I did what my dad asked me to do. In just 13 words, a hidden world began to unfold. For over a decade, Corey had not only been behind the counter at the pawn shop with antique toy guitars and rare coins, but was also said to have played a role in things no one could have imagined. According to his testimony, behind the cameras and laughter was a different reality. Corey was allegedly the gatekeeper, selecting the customers who walked through the door, and was said to signal to mysterious third parties. His testimony shook the image of Pawn Stars as a fun, light-hearted place. Corey not only alluded to Rick Harrison, but also to an organized system with encrypted conversations, secret deals, and illegal activities taking place right under the studio lights. The betrayal is painfully shocking. How could a father and son, once so beloved, become entangled in such a dark story? And how long had it been going on? How many people were unknowingly caught in it? This video will take you through the timeline from the early days of the investigation to the shock of the courtroom. We reveal a leather-bound notebook supposedly hidden under a desk containing information matching the origins of the suspects. You'll find out what the agents uncovered: passports, cash, surveillance photos, all kept as part of the twisted picture. But the most disturbing part is the story of the victims, those who walked into the pawn shop believing they'd get a good deal and never came back. We take you inside the courtroom, where Rick sat silently as his son stood up to speak. You hear the moment the judge spoke, his voice slow and steady, condemning the unacceptable behavior. The audience watched as a television empire collapsed. Networks pulled reruns, and fans were left in confusion and anger. But there's still so much we need to ask. Is Corey a victim or a fully aware adult seduced by power and money? There's no simple answer, only layers of truth to peel back. This video isn't about retelling the story. It's about tracing the clues, remembering what's been forgotten, and exposing hidden truths beneath the glitter. And in the end, we have to ask, what if everything you were once told was a lie? What if every deal on TV was a secret agreement? If it weren't for the courage of one child speaking out, would everything have been buried forever? This is the story no one wants you to know, but now, nothing can stop it. As the lights in the courtroom flicker and the air grows tense, Corey Harrison's voice rings out like a cold bell, waking the courtroom. It's not just his confessions, but the way he says them, hollow, drained, as if he has carried a secret too heavy for too many years. For years, there were no tears, no screams, just the terrifying silence broken by an undeniable truth. And that moment turned what seemed to be a procedural trial into something unforgettable, the complete collapse of everything people believed in. For many years, Corey had been a bumbling, lovable guy on television. The son, affectionately called Big Hose, Rick's trustworthy partner, who tried to modernize the shop, frequently fumbling in negotiations and getting humorously rescued by his father. But now, it all meant nothing. The television mask fell, revealing a man confessing his role in a series of crimes no one could have predicted. And he did so with a chilling calmness. The courtroom, where justice was supposed to prevail, became a stage for betrayal that day. Not just betraying the law, but betraying blood. What shocked the audience was not just the confession, but the depth of Corey's knowledge and his active involvement in this underground network. He talked about how his father taught him to identify the vulnerable, lonely travelers, homeless youths, those who came to the pawn shop with the faint hope of trading a few items for some cash. "We call them the drifters," Corey said calmly. "They walk in and try to pawn something. That's when I realized. That's when the process started." He describes using a harmless-sounding phrase, which to anyone else would seem innocent, as a signal. A few minutes later, a black SUV would pull up outside the shop, and the customer would be invited to the back to negotiate further or meet a special buyer. But they would never return to the cameras, and many of them would never be seen again. The revelation was a shock that tore apart the trust of millions of viewers. A reality show deeply embedded in American pop culture turned out to be the gateway to a hidden nightmare. It wasn't just a betrayal legally or morally, but emotionally as well. Those evenings spent together in front of the screen are now bitter memories. Corey describes the suffering, sleepless nights and faces that won't fade. "There's still a girl I see in my dreams," he says. "She was strangled with a red backpack and an old camera. She said she was recording her journey across America. I never saw her again. I don't know what happened to her, but I know it wasn't good." The room fell silent. Lawyers, journalists, even police officers felt the coldness in his voice. A witness, once a companion, now stood before the crowd like a broken man, not begging for forgiveness, but as a warning. And what made everything colder was his final reminder: "I'm not the only one." Investigators had long suspected the shop was hiding something beneath its glamorous exterior. Security footage from 2016 had captured strange details. Sudden cuts of people walking in and never returning. Strange cars rushed into the backyard at odd hours. But it wasn't until Corey's confession came to light that the puzzles were truly solved. His testimony was like a team of corkscrews creating an uncontrollable domino effect. Former employees spoke out, and anonymous calls started flooding in from those who had worked on the show or at the shop. Chilling details began to emerge. A storage room in the basement had been locked for years. Cash payment records far exceeded the actual value of the items being traded. And there was a ledger hidden in a drawer with a false bottom in Rick's desk. Not just any ledger, but a travel map. The pages contained names, sometimes just initials, along with dates and destinations. FBI agents cross-referenced them with known human trafficking routes in the Southwest United States. What they found was no longer suspicion. It was evidence, and it was so horrific that even veteran agents could hardly accept it. However, what haunted everyone wasn't just the nature of the crime, but how easily it had been hidden. The laughter, nostalgia, and celebrity glow had become the perfect cover for something very dark. The public had been deceived, and when the truth was exposed, it sparked a nationwide debate not only about Rick Harrison, but also about how society idealizes fame without asking questions. Behind every handshake on television, every autograph signed outside a shop, was a man accused of heading a sophisticated human trafficking network. And just a few feet away, in nearly every episode, Corey was smiling, playing the bumbling partner while inside, he was involved in a criminal operation no one could have imagined. He was torn apart by the horrific truth. The question is, why now? Why confess now? According to sources close to the investigation, Corey had been cooperating for months. The guilt gnawed at him. He drank more, avoided public appearances, lost weight, and became withdrawn and distant. Those close to him noticed the change. It all culminated when he was offered a deal of immunity if he provided detailed testimony and helped dismantle the entire network, and he accepted. That act was what caused everything to collapse. The introduction of this video set the tone for a journey through the complicated maze of family loyalty, organized crime, and media manipulation. But it's also a story about courage, even if it's too late. Corey Harrison's confession might not save lives, resurrect the lost, or heal wounds, but it ends the silence. And for many, that's where true justice begins. Now, we will peel back each layer. Who knows? What happened? How long did it go on? And most importantly, what will happen to the son who betrayed his father for the truth? On the morning of Rick Harrison's sentencing, the sky over Las Vegas was unusually gray. The flat clouds hung like a sad blanket over a city famous for its glitz and glamour. But today, Las Vegas was not filled with dancing music or the flashing lights of slot machines. Instead, it was the sound of reporters, the clack of agent shoes, and the sound of an era collapsing. In front of the Clark County Courthouse, a crowd had gathered silently, not to get autographs, but to witness the tragic final chapter of a man once considered a national television treasure. This was not the ending the public had imagined. A humorous pawnbroker who turned oddities into a pop culture empire. But the strangeness of today was not on the display shelves. It was in every testimony, every confession read in court, revealing a dark world no one ever imagined. Inside the crowded courtroom, the air was thick with silence. Reporters huddled together. Former staff, Distant relatives and a few remaining fans of the show sat silently, as if still trying to believe it was all a misunderstanding. At the center, Rick Harrison, in a dark gray suit, shaved clean, sat quietly, no camera flashes, no familiar smile. He looked older. His eyes no longer held the playful irony. Instead, they were cold, guarded, and inscrutable. Just a few feet away, Corey Harrison, his former colleague, his successor, his son, sat silently, his jaw clenched, eyes staring down at the floor. Since his shocking confession a few weeks ago, father and son had not exchanged a glance. And now they faced each other, not for a price negotiation, but across an invisible wall of betrayal, silence, and guilt. Judge Ellen Merrill, a stern woman in her 60s, stepped into the courtroom. With decades of handling cases large and small, she had to admit this trial felt different to her. Not just because the defendant was a celebrity, but because of the strange combination of fame, trust, and the operation of a system that had been abused. Rick Harrison was not just a name. He had been a familiar character in the lives of millions. A laugh at the dinner table, a family tradition, a television personality. And now, he was the defendant. Facing a brutal list of charges: human trafficking, money laundering, exploiting minors, organized conspiracy. The words fell like a sledgehammer, each word hitting the room in stunned silence. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. "Mr. Richard Kevin Harrison," the judge began slowly but firmly, "you have been convicted of running and benefiting from a sophisticated human trafficking network, exploiting the public's trust, and taking advantage of vulnerable people under the guise of entertainment." Her voice remained steady. "You have shown no remorse for cooperating to bring justice to the victims. Therefore, the court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." A chorus of gasps filled the room. Despite the quiet warnings, Rick remained motionless, his jaw twitching, but his eyes showed no tears, no anger, only a slow blink, as if he had finally realized the line he could not cross. Just a few feet away, Corey bowed his head, his eyes cast downward. That moment represented not only the judgment of the law, but also the complete collapse of an illusion. An empire built on laughter, bargaining, and family photos now shrank into the rubble of hidden truths. Rick's sentence wasn't just the price for a crime. It was a statement that even the most familiar things can have a dark side, and that the truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually surface. A man who once sold authenticity to America had spread lies for years. This case is not just about one man. District Attorney Milton Reyes said to reporters right after the verdict was announced. Standing before a row of microphones, he continued, "It's about a system that allowed him to operate unchecked for far too long. The problem is that fame blinds us, profit corrupts us, and the victims suffer in silence. Let this be a warning. No level of fame is enough to put you above the law." The press conference was quickly broadcast on major networks. In the days that followed, social media buzzed with shocking headlines. Rick Harrison sentenced to life. Human trafficking network exposed. The courtroom was silent as Rick showed no remorse. Las Vegas, a city that once regarded the Harrisons as a local icon, descended into chaos. The gold and silver pawn shop was shuttered by federal order. Its windows were boarded up, and security forces stood guard 24/7 to deter protesters or vandals. Tourists could only snap photos from a distance. Some left flowers in remembrance, while others held signs demanding justice for the victims. Inside the prison where Rick was taken that weekend, guards were forced to keep him in solitary confinement due to the nature of the case and for his own safety. His presence created tension in the facility, where many inmates, convicted of lesser crimes, were enraged by the scale of the offenses Rick was accused of. News spread quickly behind bars, and even in prison, there were lines that could not be crossed. Some sins were unforgivable. As the legal system pressed forward with its investigation, officials stated they were tracking down additional accomplices, both within and beyond the Harrison circle. The suspected network was far larger than initially thought. New arrest warrants were issued, assets were frozen, bank accounts were seized. For Corey, who had stood by his father in both business and their television show, he was now under federal protection. According to sources, Corey's immunity deal required him to fully cooperate, testifying in all related court cases and turning over all internal evidence from the operation. To some, he was a courageous whistleblower. To others, he was a traitor who only spoke up when cornered. Either way, his testimony was undeniable and compelling. Back in the courtroom, after the judge delivered the verdict and court officers moved to escort Rick, a strange moment unfolded. Rick suddenly turned, locking eyes with Corey for the first time in weeks. Their gazes met, not with anger nor with sorrow, but with something colder, a look that said, "You chose them over me." Afterward, Rick was handcuffed and led down a corridor where cameras could no longer follow. The image of the final moment between father and son spread rapidly, dissected frame by frame on cable news, turned into a meme, and became a topic of debate. But for those who had followed the case from the start, it was no laughing matter. It was the end of an era, a final act, long overdue. The verdict landed like a sledgehammer, but its echoes were only beginning. The silence in the courtroom was not one of reverence or peace. It was the dense silence of a battlefield where the gunfire had just ceased. It was heavy with guilt, doubt, and haunting revelations. In that space, Corey Harrison slowly stood, as if each movement was a struggle against the weight of the truth he was about to speak. Every eye turned toward him. For a moment, it seemed he would say nothing. The judge, who had just sentenced his father to life in prison, nodded. No one expected more. Corey had already testified, but what happened next was not in any script. No one had asked him to speak. There was no oath, no legal clause. He just began. His voice caught, then steadied. "I was the one," he said, his voice small and even. He stared at a distant point in the corner of the room, his eyes vacant. "I questioned them. I tracked them. I sorted them. Then I turned them over." A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. Even the court stenographer's machine paused for a beat. Corey didn't flinch. The confidence he once wore so easily on the small screen was gone, leaving a raw, bleeding wound in full view of the public. At first, he went on, saying he had only said things like, "Keep an eye on that guy," or "Ask that girl a few more questions." At first, I thought he was just worried about security issues. But then everything changed. He spoke of a second phone call, secret instruction messages sent out like flags. The courtroom froze. Reporters stopped writing, just staring. Prosecutors, who had heard confessions in the previous session, couldn't hide their shock at the revelation on national television. Corey took a breath. "It's always like this. Be friendly, ask their names, ask where they're from, what they brought, and I'll send the photo. If I get the green light, They'll arrive in a black SUV, dressed in civilian clothes. They say they're buyers or security, but they're not part of the program. They're not collectors." A cry of frustration rose from the back rows. It was the feeling of betrayal. A program once celebrated for its legacy of historical negotiations was now exposed as a mask for something dark and horrific. "I knew it was wrong," Corey said, shaking his head. "I knew it from the start, but I was scared, and I didn't know how bad it was until it was too late." The judge, with a gentle but firm voice, asked, "What do you mean by too late?" Corey didn't hesitate. "They know everything about me. Passwords, bank accounts, emails. I didn't just help, I was in it. I was part of it. And I don't know how to get out without becoming the next victim." The courtroom was stunned. Now people didn't know whether they were looking at a criminal or a victim trapped in a web. One time, Corey continued, "A young guy came to sell his father's camera. He looked hungry in his early 20s. I went through the process. I took a photo, sent a message. The green light came on, but something stopped me. I refused to buy it and told him to leave." Corey's voice caught. "That night, my dad asked me why I let him go. I said, 'He looked sick.' He just looked at me and said, 'Corey, I don't feel anything anymore. We're past that.'" A gasp echoed through the room, speechless, uncontrolled. Even the judge's expression changed. No longer the usual legal demeanor, but the bewilderment of a man facing a harsh truth. It was a moment of complete clarity. No more excuses, no more illusions, just the truth. Cold, painful, and irreversible. Rick Harrison had crossed the line years ago, and his son, Corey, had stepped away. Fear, loyalty, or sophisticated manipulation had been swept up in it. Corey had become an unwitting link in an impossible shadow network. Now, under the bright lights of the courtroom, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and cameras, he finally spoke out. "There were nights I couldn't sleep," Corey choked out. "Nights I wanted to turn myself in, but I didn't have the courage. I drank, tried to forget, tried to bury it all, but it always came back." He looked directly at the judge. "I'm not begging for forgiveness. I know what I did. I'm not a victim, but I have to speak out. Not in a news article or a legal file, but directly." The judge nodded. No one objected. No one spoke. The air was thick. The truth was finally laid bare. And it was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. By the time Corey left the courthouse under federal protection at the end of that day, his confession had gone viral. LED screens in Times Square flashed breaking news. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube exploded with viral videos from the trial. Some called him a hero, others a traitor. But either way, the world listened. And in an instant, Corey Harrison, once mocked for selling vintage video game consoles at exorbitant prices, had become a key witness in one of the darkest scandals ever to simmer in Hollywood. And the terrifying thing was, the case was far from over. From the outside, the gold and silver pawn shop looked the same as ever. Neon signs, old posters, tourists lining up to take selfies with replicas of Rick, Corey, and the late Richard Harrison. It was a strange blend of Hollywood and American nostalgia, part museum, part TV stage, all wrapped in a money-making reality show. But what no one knew, and the cameras never captured, was that inside those familiar walls, something horrific was brewing. According to FBI documents, Corey's sworn testimony, and a federal affidavit, the pawn shop was not just a family business dealing in meth. It was a funnel, a recruitment site, a legitimate front for dark operations, a secret place to identify, groom, and manipulate the vulnerable, all for the benefit of a network of abuse and profit. The danger lay in the fact that no one suspected. The glitz, the familiarity of television, the down-to-earth nature of the show made it the perfect disguise. No one suspected that the customers who once laughed and bantered in front of the camera lenses quietly disappeared through the back exit and never returned. Corey described the process like a well-oiled machine. The first step was identification. Employees, some highly trained, others covert, would discreetly watch for signs. Nervous glances, lost expressions, disheveled clothing, language barriers, or tourists without local ties. Relatives. They could be runaways, homeless individuals, or desperate people pawning their entire possessions for a meager sum. To outsiders, they were just customers needing quick cash. But to those in the know, they were targets. Once identified, employees would quietly mark the individual. Seemingly harmless phrases, a rare item in the back, a collector wants to see this, were code. Internal signals triggered the external machinery. The handlers never revealed themselves, never appeared on camera, and their identities remain a mystery under investigation. Corey admitted that Rick set up the operational protocols, not through written instructions or manuals, but through repetition and fear. It was like boarding a ship for work without knowing the journey was illegal. In a closed hearing, Corey described how he made everything seem like a normal part of the job, as if it were the legitimate way to make money. The next phase was engagement. Employees were instructed to create a friendly atmosphere, gain the customer's trust, and then suggest personal appraisals of items, often a pretext to bring them into back rooms, concealed from public view and cameras. Behind the main shop was a series of rooms not all employees or visitors were allowed to access. While some were merely storage or security areas, others were used for scheduled meetings, soundproof rooms without windows, some with emergency exits that didn't lead back to the shop, but directly to a rear alley where SUVs were often parked. Surveillance camera data collected during the investigation revealed numerous cases. People entered but were never seen leaving through the front door. One particularly damning piece of evidence was an undeleted recording. A young woman was escorted out of the shop through the back entrance by two men in civilian clothes. She arrived alone, carrying a rough canvas bag and a camera. Her name later appeared in a secret ledger under a digital signature, alongside a date and code linked to a known human trafficking route. But according to court documents, the pawn shop's role didn't stop at identifying and transferring victims. It also functioned as a communication hub. Rick owned multiple phones, some registered under false names, others linked to overseas providers. Messages were sent through encrypted apps and transactions were recorded using a special notation system. One such encrypted ledger was found hidden behind a panel near Rick's office, along with a burner phone and a stack of cash worth over $230,000, all now sealed by federal authorities. A terrible secret has just been exposed. This is not an ordinary case. It's a massive criminal network that's slowly unraveling. If you want to keep up with these shocking revelations, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates. An FBI agent described it as the operational headquarters of the entire enterprise. In a floor safe, there was not only money and jewelry, but also hard drives containing hours of close-up surveillance footage of customers and recordings of Rick's conversations with unidentified individuals. One notable recording was Rick's alleged statement: "We're sitting on a gold mine. Vegas brings them in, we just make them disappear." That statement was later repeated in closing arguments at the trial, sending chills through victims' families, prosecutors, and the jury. Even more chilling was the fact that some victims had appeared on the show. Fleeting faces, once considered regular customers, were now scrutinized by viewers. Editors who worked on the show's early seasons also spoke out about scenes cut without clear reason, scenes featuring customers who were not approved or were ordered removed by producers. Although the production company officially denied any involvement, it severed ties with the Harrison family, removed all content from streaming platforms, and issued a statement expressing horror at the allegations. The physical structure of the pawn shop itself became part of a multi-day investigation led by the FBI. A secret space was uncovered beneath the original foundation, filled with evidence bags, documents, burner phones, expired identification papers, and personal items seemingly belonging to missing persons. An agent described it as a tomb of forgotten lives. When asked how all of this could happen in plain sight of so many agents without notice, Corey shared something chilling. We normalized it and built a culture of silence around it. If you saw something odd and looked the other way, didn't ask too many questions, you'd be reassigned or fired. But if you complied, you'd be rewarded with trips and cash. We were trained to ignore it. And it's hard to imagine that in a building so closely monitored, such a sophisticated operation could thrive. But its outward innocence was the disguise. The cameras weren't an obstacle, they were a shield. No one suspected a reality TV star could be involved in human trafficking. That very absurdity provided its cover, and the public unwittingly played along. They played a part in it. They came to take photos, shake hands, or get autographs. They watched the episodes religiously, turning Rick and Corey into cultural icons. The shop was romanticized, and the Harrisons were celebrated as paragons of hard work and working-class charm. Meanwhile, behind the glass cases and antique rifles, lies were being told. Now, with the shop under federal control, a major question hangs in the air. How many people came seeking help, only to encounter horror? And how many walked away unaware of how close they'd come? They were about to be named. The investigation uncovered more than we could bear: surveillance records, confessions, and a pawn shop that became a gateway to an operation far darker than anyone imagined. But it wasn't until federal agents discovered something called the ledger that the operation's scale became truly terrifying. Hidden in a false bottom drawer in Rick's desk, the ledger was no accident. It was tucked among mundane receipts and paperwork. But when the drawer was opened, the agents couldn't forget what they saw. Not digital, not flashy, but handwritten in an old leather-bound book, smelling of aged paper. Dozens of pages held tightly organized handwriting with symbols and codes. These entries weren't just notes. They were a detailed record, a system of human transactions reduced to symbols, coordinates, and codes, like an inventory. Agents spent days decoding the entries, discovering they could be linked to known smuggling routes. Things began to clarify, but the ambiguity of some entries only heightened the unease. One entry, dated a year prior, simply read, KJ, November 14th, 2022, to 330 pages. This matched the name and description of a young woman who went missing in Las Vegas in November 2022, her last known location across the street from the gold and silver pawn shop. Her disappearance remains unsolved. Federal agents began extracting valuable information from the ledger, which contained hundreds of similar entries. Analysts created a timeline connecting entries to missing persons cases. Within the first week, they identified over 40 names, all real people with families and histories. Their dreams were now reduced to scrawled lines in a secret book owned by one of America's most famous TV personalities. Some entries included attached photographs, clear but untraceable. Others contained unsettling descriptors like tatalvi or limp. Notably, some were marked in red ink with words like missing, leaving people to wonder about their true significance. The destinations listed in the ledger had previously been linked to human trafficking. A human trafficking investigation, a warehouse in Arizona, an abandoned truck in New Mexico, and remote properties outside Los Angeles. Each location was raided and searched. The FBI considers the ledger the core of the case, and it quickly became the focus of a rapidly escalating nationwide inquiry. But more troubling is that the ledger also raised questions about others who may have been involved. Some names weren't initials but aliases or full names, like Vlad, Nico, Dr. R, and Zeb, all linked to dark criminal activities. Corey confirmed these names represented off-grid contacts who never appeared near the shop. One entry stunned even the most seasoned agents. It bore the full name and date of a man, Jeremy Salinger, a former employee at a Reno youth shelter who vanished during a misconduct investigation and now seemed to have resurfaced in a very different role as one of Rick Harrison's buyers. The ledger wasn't just a diary, it was a roadmap into a vast criminal network. But even as it provided critical clues for investigators, it also brought renewed hope to the families of the missing. Even as their pain and anger grew, cases might be solved, and some families were contacted and shown entries related to their loved ones. But the investigation didn't stop at finding the missing. It opened larger questions about who knew of the ledger's existence and who might have profited from it. Some former shop employees came forward saying they were paid hush money to stay silent about what they witnessed. All these stories revolved around a tattered black notebook, untitled, authorless, with pages full of mysteries waiting to be unveiled. The victim records were so powerful that the entire jury was deeply moved, and at least 2 press members had to leave the courtroom, overwhelmed by the impact. The ledger was no longer just evidence, but a tragic monument to lives destroyed by criminal operations. Though Rick Harrison repeatedly denied the allegations, claiming the ledger was merely a customer tracking log and had been forged, forensic experts swiftly debunked this defense. They compared handwriting from business documents, personal correspondence, and even signed memorabilia. In the end, the match was undeniable. The ledger clearly confirmed the validity of all accusations, exposing a dark secret. Rick Harrison's downfall wasn't due to his style or the scale of his operations, but the chilling, meticulous detail of each entry in the notebook, with names matching so many real lives. It was undeniable evidence, lying silently under his desk for years, waiting for the right moment to speak. And now, the notebook has spoken, not just in the courtroom, but far beyond, capturing the nation's attention. Rick Harrison's collapse wasn't an overnight event, but the result of years of secret dealings, endless anonymous accusations, and one of the most complex and widespread surveillance operations ever conducted on American soil. The operation's primary goal was to penetrate a place that seemed untouchable. An empire gathered enough evidence to build a case and ultimately dismantle a human trafficking ring hidden behind the veneer of the entertainment industry. For years, there were rumors about missing customers at the Harrison pawn shop and suspicious stories about the shop's ties to criminal activities elsewhere in Nevada. But those rumors weren't enough to build a case, and the Harrisons' celebrity status kept them shielded from scrutiny. But everything changed with a single phone call, triggering a major investigation that led to dark secrets never before revealed. The call didn't disclose the caller's identity, only leaving a chilling message. "You won't believe this, but Pawn Stars is just a front. People walk in and never come out. You need to start watching the back doors from the start." The call was recorded and initially dismissed, as anonymous accusations against high-profile figures aren't uncommon. But something about the call, its calm tone and mention of known trafficking routes, caught the attention of a junior analyst. She flagged the case for further review, and just a week later, an internal task force was formed to begin tracking. The first task was to determine if the disappearances were real. A team began cross-referencing local missing persons reports with timestamps from security cameras at the pawn shop, many of which were archived in promotional materials or leaked as behind-the-scenes footage. They quickly identified 3 missing young adults, all last seen within a 2-block radius of the shop. Strangely, all 3 were from out of town with no ties to the area. They vanished under mysterious circumstances, enough for the task force to expand the investigation. In June 2021, Operation Pawn Trap was officially launched. Phase 1 focused on surveillance. FBI agents were embedded in surrounding businesses in various disguises: tourists, delivery drivers, even cable repair technicians. Over the next 6 months, they monitored the pawn shop's daily activities and uncovered unusual patterns. Black SUVs frequently parked in the alley behind the building at odd hours. Customers entered the shop and never returned. Public footage of the shop also showed employees taking irregular breaks, only to return with completely altered demeanors. An agent disguised as a tourist entered the shop with a hidden camera. He posed as a man looking to pawn a vintage camera, an item known to carry sentimental value, just to see how they'd handle it. Inside, he was greeted by Corey, but Corey's behavior suggested he was distracted, barely making eye contact and constantly glancing toward the back hallway. The agent later reported feeling as though he was being watched by Corey. Not just him, but as if an invisible network was tracking his every move. Phase 2 of the investigation began in February 2022, when the FBI obtained a warrant to install outdoor surveillance equipment on rooftops near the pawn shop. High-definition cameras captured activity at the back exit and loading dock 24/7. After 2 weeks of monitoring, they had the first major breakthrough came. A woman, identified as a 19-year-old college student from Oregon, entered the shop alone. She was never seen leaving the storefront, but footage from the back showed her being escorted to a dark-colored SUV with 2 unidentified men she hadn't arrived with. Due to the significance of this footage, the operation expanded, and Operation Pawn Trap became a multi-agency collaboration, including the Department of Homeland Security and Interpol. At this point, investigators realized they weren't dealing with just a rogue businessman, but a far more serious criminal network. They continued gathering evidence through digital forensic tools, including subpoenas for Rick Harrison's phone records, bank statements, and digital communications. Some platforms resisted extracting this data, citing privacy and celebrity privilege. But when the FBI presented documents justifying the data requests, the walls began to crumble. Rick had used burner phones for years, with encrypted messaging apps and cloud servers based overseas, clearly knowing how to operate covertly. But humans make mistakes. And by late 2022, the FBI recovered a series of encrypted voice memos backed up on a hidden drive in Rick's cloud account. One shocking message was heard. The girl from yesterday, perfect, clean, no baggage. Make sure she's sorted by Monday. We have a buyer in Santa Fe. Another memo only noted the girl's initials and promised to update the ledger later. These recordings, combined with surveillance data and the ledger eventually found in Rick's office, turned suspicion into certainty. The FBI was ready to act, but they didn't act alone. In January 2023, Phase 3 of the operation was launched. FBI agents raided 4 properties linked to Rick Harrison: his home, the pawn shop, a warehouse in North Las Vegas, and a shell company office building in Delaware. At all 4 locations, they found critical evidence: wiped phones, financial ledgers, unregistered weapons, and most disturbingly, personal belongings of at least 12 missing persons. The pawn shop was the investigation's hotspot. In the office, agents uncovered the infamous ledger, and in the cramped basement, they found items like clothing, torn passports, and traces of blood, matching missing persons through ADN testing. Though the raid wasn't immediately publicized, news began to leak. At first, Las Vegas outlets only reported that a federal raid had been conducted at the pawn shop, and online fans began speculating that it might be related to tax evasion or illegal antique trafficking. No one suspected the truth was far graver. When the FBI held its first press conference, they kept details under wraps, only stating that an ongoing investigation into human trafficking and organized crime allegations was specifically tied to the gold and silver pawn shop. The FBI spokesperson said, "We have collected evidence and will release more information as it becomes available." The world erupted within hours. Major news networks covered the Las Vegas scandal, and paparazzi staked out Rick Harrison's home. Fans were outraged, and the History Channel swiftly canceled upcoming episodes of Pawn Stars indefinitely. Streaming platforms halted episode reruns, and sales of merchandise from the iconic shop were stopped. A cultural icon of America, celebrated for years, was suddenly engulfed in a massive scandal. Phase 4 of Operation Pawn Trap led to the prosecution of Rick Harrison. He was arrested at his home without incident, while Corey Harrison, who had begun cooperating with investigators, was placed under federal protection. More of Rick's team were apprehended: a shop logistics coordinator, 2 unidentified delivery drivers, and a woman suspected of recruiting victims within the shop. A 200-page indictment was filed, outlining events, witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and digital communications, all piecing together a story of systematic crime and exploitation. After 2 weeks, the jury reached a landmark decision. Rick Harrison would face trial on multiple serious charges, including human trafficking, conspiracy to commit money laundering, obstruction of justice, and breach of trust. The trial quickly drew massive public attention. But what truly mattered was the investigative work behind the scenes as the case unfolded. Operation Pawn Trap became a critical lesson in how law enforcement can infiltrate and dismantle organizations once admired by the public, proving that fame doesn't shield you from consequences. It also demonstrated that with enough patience and diligence, even the most tightly guarded secrets will eventually come to light. Agents on the case still call the pawn shop the Quiet House, a place that seemed loud and bustling on the outside, but harbored silent, dark secrets. Now, every file, every surveillance video from the shop carries a name, a face, and a life upended. As victims began to be identified, the real stories of what happened inside the infamous pawn shop slowly emerged. These stories were not mere statistics. or anonymous entities shuffled through a system, but the lives of real people were swept into this nightmare with no one intervening in time. The heartbreaking stories of victims and their families are the clearest testament to the brutality of a system they were unaware of until it was too late. Then there was David Monroe, a homeless young man recently released from foster care. He was living in shelters in Las Vegas, saving up for a bus ticket back to Missouri. Friends remembered him as a gentle, soft-spoken man and an emotive guitar artist. In May 2022, David walked into the pawn shop with a vintage guitar, a gift from the last foster family that cared for him, the only thing he had left from a turbulent childhood. According to witnesses who later came forward, a shop employee told David the guitar was special and might have a potential buyer. He was led to a back room, and that was the last time he was seen through the front door. The final call from his phone was traced near the shop, followed by complete silence. His name appeared in the ledger with a check mark and a simple note. One of the recurring symbols investigators now believe indicates a completed process. David's vintage guitar was discovered months later at an online auction linked to a shell company registered under one of Rick Harrison's aliases. David's body was never found. And then there was Lena, one of the few survivors. Unlike many others, Lena is still here to tell her story, though with scars that may never heal. She was 19 at the time, a college dropout trying to make ends meet. Lena walked into the pawn shop to get some cash by pawning her grandfather's heirloom watch. An employee offered to double its value if she agreed to meet a private collector in the back of the shop. Lured by the money and desperate for it, she agreed. Inside the back room, two men were waiting. They asked her name, where she was from, and if anyone knew she was there. The questions began to make her uneasy. Lena said she changed her mind and wanted to leave, but one of the men blocked the door and grabbed her arm. What happened next was a blur of panic. Her survival instincts kicked in. She screamed to draw attention. Another employee passing by stepped in just in time, startling the two men. Lena escaped by bolting out of the shop and running straight to a nearby diner to seek help. When she reported the incident to the police, it was brushed off. There were no visible injuries. No footage was provided, and her story of being targeted at one of Las Vegas's most famous locations was dismissed as far-fetched. Lena was labeled a troublemaker, possibly intoxicated, and told to stay away from the area. Her report was shelved and forgotten. But years later, during a federal investigation, agents found Lena's name in an encrypted message from Rick. One line read, "The girl from earlier slipped away. Find out who she talked to." When agents tracked her down in 2024, Lena broke down in tears. "I thought no one would believe me. I thought I imagined it all, that it was my fault. Now I know I was just lucky." Her testimony became a cornerstone of the entire case. From the description of the room and the two men to small details like the placement of furniture and the locked door. Everything was corroborated by the shop's interior blueprints and data from Rick's digital key system. But not everyone got the chance to speak like Lena. Not everyone survived to tell their story. One of the most heartbreaking cases was that of Jaden Myers, a 17-year-old runaway from Utah, struggling with identity and coming to Las Vegas on a journey of self-discovery. Days before vanishing, Jaden posted a short video on social media, standing in front of the pawn shop, smiling and whispering, "Finally made it! Gonna try selling some old tech and see what happens." That was the last time anyone saw Jaden. His phone was found in a dumpster behind a casino. The final video, blurry and shaky, showed a windowless room with a single light bulb dangling. He whispered faintly, "They're not who they say they are." The timestamp on the video matched when Jaden entered the pawn shop. His family still holds candlelight vigils to this day. Jaden's mother, choking back tears in the press, said, "He just wanted to be seen, to be understood. He didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." The victims came from all walks of life, different ethnicities, ages, economic backgrounds. Some were tourists, some were locals. Some had entrepreneurial dreams, looking to sell a valuable item to invest. Others were simply trying to pay rent by pawning family heirlooms. But what united them was the moment they stepped into a building that seemed like an opportunity, only to vanish in silence. Each name released stirred pain and anger. Some families, long suffering in agony, finally got answers, though it brought the deepest grief. Others still wait for news, clinging to hope that their loved ones are alive, that somehow they escaped. Nonprofit organizations aiding trafficking victims stepped in to support families. Hotlines were flooded with calls. Survivors began speaking out, sharing their stories in support groups, and forums even recorded video statements to be played in court during Rick Harrison's sentencing. "I trusted him because he seemed like someone you could trust," a young woman sobbed in a video. "He reminded me of someone's dad. I didn't know he'd betray me." These stories aren't easy to hear, and they aren't meant to entertain. But they need to be told because behind the fame of the TV show and its familiar smiles was a well-oiled but brutal machine. And those caught in it weren't just names in a book. They were people. They deserved to be remembered. Pawn Stars wasn't just a hit TV show. It was a cultural phenomenon. At its peak, each episode drew millions of viewers, and the show became one of the most recognizable reality TV icons in the world. Rick Harrison, along with his son Corey, late father Richard Harrison, and Chumlee, turned an ordinary Las Vegas pawn shop into a legendary destination. With witty banter, lively debates, and unexpected deals, they captivated audiences everywhere. People flocked to the shop as if it were a sacred site. For over a decade, they sold America a dream of resilience and family spirit. But now, after Rick's indictment, that image has completely shifted. The show is now seen as a carefully crafted front, concealing serious illicit activities behind it. To understand the depth of this deception, we must look back at what the show represented. Pawn Stars wasn't just about selling antiques. It was about trust. Viewers felt they were witnessing authentic moments, interactions that, while scripted, created an illusion of reality. And that illusion took root. Rick Harrison built himself into a genuine entrepreneur, a straight-talker, someone many viewers trusted, even loved. That's why the accusations against him were all the more unbelievable and shocking. The early seasons of the show were largely about everyday life. A man brought in a Civil War-era gun. A woman shared her father's baseball card. The Harrisons discussed, consulted experts, and closed deals. But over time, subtle changes emerged. Some episodes began to feel staged, with Corey taking a more prominent role. Rick grew more cautious around cameras. The shop's setting also shifted. Fewer real customers appeared and more scenes were pre-recorded. Former employees, speaking anonymously after Rick's accusations, said that from season 8 onward, most conversations were scripted and in some cases entirely staged. While this isn't uncommon in reality TV, what was unprecedented was how editing could serve to hide off-camera activities. A former assistant director revealed that Rick ordered the deletion of numerous raw cuts. He would come in after filming and mark which scenes to destroy, citing poor quality or irrelevance, which they assumed was mere perfectionism. Another editor said he was instructed to blur the faces of certain individuals, not for legal reasons, but because they were later identified as victims in the investigation. This raised questions about whether evidence was erased and if some victims were inadvertently shown in the background. Were the edits meant to protect someone or conceal the truth? No formal charges have been filed against the producers or network to date, but some internal investigations have been conducted. The producer's spokesperson denied knowledge of any wrongdoing, asserting that Rick was responsible for daily operations and the show only filmed approved segments. Yet questions linger. Some episodes were pulled from reruns. Video forensic experts are analyzing footage for anomalies, missing frames, angles avoiding sensitive areas, and cuts showing signs of meticulous editing. A notable scene in season 11 showed a young woman talking to Rick about an heirloom. After a cut, her expression shifted from calm to visibly anxious. She was later identified as one of the names in the case files. Even the way the show was filmed may have contributed to the cover-up. Unlike documentary crews, reality TV often films in bursts, cutting sensitive parts or re-editing scenes for drama, meaning not every moment is captured, and what isn't captured goes unquestioned. Chumlee, one of the show's most prominent faces, has largely vanished from public view, adding to the mystery. Since Rick's arrest, he has remained silent with the media, offering only a brief, cryptic statement through his representative. "I'm shocked and saddened by what I've heard. I knew nothing about anything like this." Corey, who testified in court as a witness, has been held in protective custody and hasn't appeared publicly since. The absence of these familiar faces has heightened the public's sense of confusion and disillusionment. The once familiar show has now become a trail of cold, hard evidence. The question is no longer whether Rick is guilty, but how it all unfolded right under the camera lenses. One theory suggests the show itself was the perfect cover, masking what was really happening. With a solid reputation, Rick was trusted by the public, seemingly too famous to be involved in anything sinister. The cameras created a sense of transparency, but in reality, much could have been staged. Many visitors to the shop over the years confirmed the sense of safety they felt. Cameras everywhere, TV personalities so familiar. "You never thought anything was wrong," one woman recalled. That was the trust Rick relied on. Pawn Stars' fame allowed Rick to operate in two parallel worlds, one as an upright entrepreneur and another reality the public never saw. The line between reality and script was so blurred that no one could tell where the show ended and the crimes began. And now, after the scandal, the show's legacy is under serious question. The once joyful portrait of Las Vegas life has become a textbook example of how media can be used to deceive and obscure the truth. Photo books, memorabilia, and autograph signings, once cherished, are now evidence of a brand built on betrayed trust. Platforms like Hulu and Peacock removed the show from their catalogs, while the History Channel was forced to apologize and sever ties with Rick. A wave of refunds flooded merchandise websites, and collectors who once proudly displayed signed items quietly tucked them away. Worst of all, fan forums, once buzzing with love, are now rife with suspicion and regret. People are re-watching episodes with wearier eyes, wondering why they missed the red flags. One Redditor even posted a detailed analysis of episode 113, noting how every moment now looks different. from Corey's tense glances to customers' erratic behavior. Although the show has ended, the questions it leaves behind continue to haunt us. How many other public figures are hiding dark secrets behind the camera lens? The fall of the pawnshop stars serves as a stark reminder that fame is not a shield, and sometimes the faces we trust the most hold the most shocking truths. Thank you for watching this video. If you were captivated by the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any secrets yet to be revealed. Be sure to leave a comment with 1 if you empathize with Rick Harrison, or 0 if you have a different opinion. Share your thoughts, because even more shocking revelations are waiting for you. See you in the next video.